So thank you, Markus. Good afternoon to everybody. I would like to give you a brief overview of EASA's activities in the field of international cooperation. My name is Frank Steffens. I'm head of the International Cooperation Department at EASA. And I try to use this thing. Now, by the way, I have to catch up about 30 minutes and have a time slot of 30 minutes. So I hope you forgive me if I will still give some slides to you. But I will try to speed up for sure. So now this doesn't work. Let's do this one. So, first slide, just to give you an idea where we are located inside EASA. You see this is the structure of EASA. On the very left side, you see the Strategy and Safety Management Directorate, and the little box at the very bottom, this is my department. We are about 47 people working there, and we cover all the areas that I will now address in my presentation. So, what drives us in international cooperation? Here, basically, we have two main objectives, strategic objectives that we have derived from the European Union external aviation policy. We have clustered them into the two main high-level targets. The first one drives us to strive through international cooperation that citizens' interests for safety and environmental protection are met at global level. So that includes, of course, a safe environment for EU citizens when traveling abroad, including safe conditions for all citizens using European products. This is the second dimension, if you wish. And the third dimension is including safe conditions for the operation of European products abroad. There's a second target, which is probably of even more interest for you, and this is the assurance of a global level playing field for industry. This is quite challenging for us, but the main drivers here are, because aviation transport is all across the world and seamless operation and free exchange of products and services is essential, we try to achieve harmonized standards as much as possible, which means then that the industry is exposed to similar, if not the same, standards worldwide, and that leads to reduction of redundant work when it comes to validation and additional approvals. So this is a main driver for our activity as well. For the work that we are doing, and this reflects a bit also our internal organizational structure, we have basically the four pillars that you can see here, or the four layers that you can see here on this slide. The first one is institutional relations. This covers, at the very top, I would say, bilateral agreements. So for the time being, we have 3 bilateral agreements running. One is with the US. I think this is the currently most important one. We have one with Canada as well, and we have a third one with Brazil. We are currently working on 2 others. Let's say, most important one after the 3 ones that we have already is the one with China. So for China, we are in active negotiation. We support the European Commission in order to conclude a bilateral, let's say, within the next foreseeable weeks. And also, we are quite advanced with Japan. We have started informal consultations with the Japanese colleagues already more than, I think, a year ago. But now we are quite advanced, so I will come to more details a bit later on. Besides this, we have about 120 so-called working arrangements with different authorities all across the world. These working arrangements, they don't have the legal level as a bilateral agreement. They don't allow us to deviate from European rules when it comes to foreign applicants who want to import their products into Europe. But they allow us to facilitate, for instance, the acceptance of European products abroad. So we have a lot of working arrangements that clarify the process for validation by a third country, and for many third countries, we are luckily in a position that under these working arrangements, the third countries accept European products without an additional validation. So I think these working arrangements also provide for a lot of efficiency gains when it comes to certification and acceptance of products all across the world. Last but not least, what I would like to mention here is our relationships with ICAO. We have increased our relationship with ICAO, our activities with ICAO significantly. I will also come to this in a moment. But just to say that the ICAO relationships of EASA are also managed by, under this first layer, institutional relations. The second one are our external representations. So currently we have 4 external representations. We are working on further ones, but of course you can understand that the political consent of the European Commission and the political environment plays a very big role. I will come to the places where these representatives are in a minute. Technical cooperation is the third layer, so we actively support third country authorities, but also not only authorities, but also for some projects, European industry in getting access to third countries and third country authorities to build up a system that is sufficiently safe, secure, and allows us to cooperate with them in a good manner. So one example is when ICAO goes to a country and comes up with a very bad effective implementation, the European Commission spends a lot of money through us providing support to those countries to be better in their regulatory oversight. So this is the third layer of our activities, and the last one is technical training and ECQB. ECQB is the European Central Questions Data Bank for pilot theoretical examinations. We are also doing this. The technical training is of a particular relevance because we provide under the third layer also technical training to third country authorities, and the demand for this is constantly increasing. We also have quite some demand from the industry in getting training on regulatory matters and so on. So, with this, I come to my next slide to explain a bit the institutional relations. So I already mentioned the BASAs that we have in place. So my colleague Mark Kieft will go a bit further into detail on how we implement the US BASA. This is just to provide you this overview. For the 120 working arrangements that I mentioned already, we cover, for instance, the pan-European network. We cover SAFA, Safety Assessment of Foreign Aircraft. We also have, besides those quasi-multilateral agreements, we have pure bilateral ones with the UAE, for instance, with Singapore, with China, with Qatar. So this is really going all across the world, and the working arrangements are a main pillar for our work. With regards to ICAO, the multinational relationships we have here is we coordinate on matters of a global nature all over Europe. So we work closely with the member states. We also provide support to the member states. For instance, one very easy thing that we do is we concentrate and we collect all the inputs that member states have, for instance, on ICAO state letters, and we centrally provide the feedback then to ICAO. This is quite some efficiency gain. And then last but not least, we provide, of course, also technical expertise to ICAO activities, to panels, regional oversight activities. We provide our experts to this. So we have quite some active cooperation. And a last activity, this is the so-called RSOO support, Regional Safety Oversight Organizations. This is now something that ICAO is supporting very much all across the world, and EASA is a main player in this. I will explain a bit more in a minute as well. EU-China negotiations, I focus on, let's say, few key messages, and then I will hand over to Gregory Lievre. He has some more details on where we concretely are and how we are proceeding. So the last negotiation round was done recently in Brussels from the 27th to the 29th September. This was the last formal consultation round by the Commission with their counterparts in China, and this after successful completion, and I think we have successfully completed this, allows us for the signing of the BASA. We expect the initialing of the BASA still within the next 2 weeks, early December. And once this is done, the way is free to really sign the BASA formally. However, what we have to say is that it will be implemented only when the so-called technical implementation procedures are ready. And they will specify in more detail how we actually cooperate, who has to send an application where, how does the validation process work and stuff like this. There's a high interest on the Chinese side, there's a high interest on the European side, and we are really, I think we have done a lot, we have achieved a lot, and you will see, as I said, a few more details in a minute. The next one is on Japan. Also here, we are already in the phase of formal negotiations. So we had a first formal negotiation round also very recently. Early this month, we supported the European Commission in that, and the scope of this bilateral agreement, other than the one for China, which is focusing on production design, this one here will focus also on maintenance. So this is at least the intention. We see how far we get in the formal consultations. A confidence building mission or visit has taken place already in October, and that paved the way for us to have sufficient confidence that we can start with formal negotiations. So that's where we are, and if you ask me when will we be able to sign a bilateral, I cannot come up with a definite date because the devil is in the detail, but certainly the process will be much, much faster than with the Chinese, because we have already experience with Japanese products, for instance. EU, US, also here I focus only on those things that will not be covered by Mark Kieft later on. So as you know, we have currently 2 annexes under the BASA with the US, covering production, design, and also maintenance. We are currently discussing and negotiating with the US side the Annex 3 for flight crew licensing and the Annex 4 for flight simulations training devices. Technically, we are ready with those annexes. However, on a political level, we are still, let's say, in a phase that has to be unlocked. We are quite optimistic that we will be able, in the course of the next bilateral oversight board meetings, to unlock the situation. And then also here we have all the facilitation in place related to FCL and FSTDs. For the Annex 1, this will be covered by Mark, so I skip this one. For the maintenance, maybe just to highlight, because there will be no dedicated presentation, Mark, on maintenance, right? If I'm mistaken. So just to highlight a few things here, we have recently signed a new Mark document. Not recently, it's already quite a while ago, but now it's being implemented. So the so-called JCMB board met on the 8th of November to discuss the implementation. A new element is the so-called MMT, this maintenance management team. This has a corresponding CMT also in the field of certification, where all the authorities that have bilaterals with each other, so this is mainly the FAA, EASA, TCCA, and ANAC, work together in order to streamline processes and have the same approaches and not to do redundant work. So this has been established. And the concept, as I mentioned, that is visible on the slide, is the same as for the CMT. And the first MMT meeting took place 2 weeks ago. Quick one on Canada. So we have the new TIP revision number 3, which entered into force on the 18th of September. Main items that are addressed in here is the implementation of a process to ensure the maintenance of confidence. This is something that is really essential because besides all the technical work, you need to establish a level of trust. Even if there are organizational changes which are not so unfamiliar with TCCA, we need to have a provision that allows us to know how they are working and to keep the level of trust that we have in each other. This is an issue for all bilateral agreements. It's not only for Canada, of course. And also we want to strengthen our cooperation and continued airworthiness. And last but not least, and I think this is really some progress, we have a provisional application of the TIP to Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland. So the EFTA states are covered as well, and I think this is a huge efficiency gain because they formally don't belong to the European Union, but they are working under the same rules and conditions as we are. So nothing prevents us to work together and have the same kind of acceptance also across the Atlantic. Last one here is Brazil. Here we also had a recent, not recent, but we had a TIP revision. It introduced OSD provisions for validation, which is another important step. The next revision should be then released in spring 2018. What we want to also include here is the confidence maintenance that I mentioned already. Then important step is the basic, non-basic classification criteria. Of course, for the US, very important because they are permanently looking at our fees and charges regulations, so the relevance is a bit different, but when it comes to facilitating and approving the technical cooperation, it is still as relevant. TCO, ETSO, mutual recognition, MRB report acceptance, and simplified processes for approved manuals. This is also, or has been very burdensome in the past. I hope we will make some progress in this respect. Now, working arrangements. I mentioned the background of working arrangements, that they don't cover, that they don't allow us to deviate from European rules. However, they are an important tool to formalize the relationships that we have with third country authorities. just to come to the points again, unilateral validation of EASA certificates by CAAs of third countries. We have examples of currently China, Vietnam, and the UAE. We are working on improving those. Maybe the ones with China will become obsolete, or most probably they will become obsolete once we have the BASA in place. But this is definitely our target. If we are confronted with an authority that has same or similar standards, that we convince them that they accept our products without an additional administrative certification burden. Same applies also to the acceptance of maintenance organizations within Europe. The difficulty is here that we have member states' responsibilities, but we are working on this as well. For instance, with Singapore. Bilateral support for validation exercises, so working arrangements with Japan we have in place. We have one with Hong Kong. With Japan we have the bilateral soon, so hopefully also this will become obsolete then. And operation modalities for the implementation of EU agreements. So for instance, with the FAA, we have this working arrangement on the final assembly line in Alabama. So the working arrangements are still a tool for specific issues that we want to resolve with certain bilateral partners as well. Quick view on where we are represented all across the world. So currently we have these 4 representations. We have also mentioned Brussels because some of our people are placed in Brussels. We have a close link to the Commission there. That's why it's not a representative office, but important for us nevertheless. We have a representative in Canada who is mainly focusing on ICAO work, but we want to strengthen, of course, the relationship and his responsibilities also with regards to the relationship that we have with TCCA. USA, Washington, Thomas Mikler is our representative there. I think he's quite well known. He is really facilitating a lot of the cooperation we have in place with the FAA. China, Beijing, Javier Vicedo is our colleague over there, and he was really of high importance for the progress that we made with regards to the bilateral agreement. And he is also deeply involved when it comes to the support of our, let's say, big applicants. When it comes to validation, I'm just mentioning as an example Airbus aircraft, the delivery of Airbus aircraft, which is always a challenge in China. So he's really important for this practical support. You see that the scope of activities varies from region to region. They don't always do the same kinds of tasks. And then for Singapore, we have recently opened an office. So this is really brand new, we can say. Our former chief legal advisor, Frank Manahutu, is working from there. He is supported, and this is a model for other offices that we want to open worldwide. He is supported by a gentleman who is working on 145 organizations, so we are able to support this activity on site, which is much more efficient than doing it all across the world. So, and this also increases our visibility in this area, so we are thinking of having a similar model in place for future offices to come. Next one is technical cooperation. Maybe, yeah, just the big picture is, of course, safety doesn't stop at EU borders. We need to cooperate. I think the reasons I have already explained. We are very much engaged in these technical cooperation activities, and the important thing is here we have only limited funds ourselves. The main funds come from sponsors. So the main sponsor is the European Commission. The European Commission, in their political considerations, they have projects which cover, for instance, a certain region, and a part of the project then is related to aviation. Sometimes we also have projects that are only related to aviation, and in these cases EASA is doing the work. So we are the main partner for the European Commission to deliver this kind of technical support work. And of course, some of the projects are not only related to authorities, they're also related to industry. So we have so-called partnership agreements in place. The China one is a typical example, where industry is given a forum as part of the project to present their products, to present what they can offer to customers in China, for instance, and to advertise, but also technically to contribute that the authority understands better what we are doing here in Europe. So this is very successful, in particular in China. Other projects that are coming up are Southeast Asia, but also Latin America, where we hope we can use the same model. I'm just showing you here which parts of the world we are currently covering with our projects. a big one is still missing here, but it will soon be signed, and that's the one for Latin America. So it will give us access, and it will give also you, European industries, so as far as you are representing European industries, of course, it will give you an opportunity also to participate in those projects. So just a few examples. I don't go into the details here. I just mentioned some very minimum key figures. Our technical cooperation projects, and there's even a second slide, you have all kinds of details here. I just want to say that our technical cooperation projects typically have a period duration of 4 years, sometimes 5 years. And the volume, the financial volume ranges between, I would say, 1 million and typically up to 10 million. So if you take the average, we are at around 5 to 7 million per project. And this allows for a lot of activities, and it is very much appreciated, of course, by the beneficiary states. We have a lot of states in Africa where we are involved in European support projects, but the specific ones which are really important for us are the ones that are coming up to our level, let's say FAA, EASA level, a bilateral partner level. That's why the Chinese one is for us of utmost importance at this stage. Now I'm skipping the next one. A few words, looking at the time. Does anybody keep the time? Do I still have 5 minutes? No? Just go on. Okay. I'm very sorry. I don't want to bother you too long, but I will. So just a very few words on RSOs. So regional safety oversight organizations. Everybody understands that a single aviation authority in these times is not able anymore, unless it's as big as the FAA, for instance, and maybe the Chinese authority, CAAC, is able to have in one country all the competencies and the capacities that are required to oversee to the last level of detail technical developments in both organizations, but also on a product level. This is almost impossible. And it was not even possible, let's say, in the very past before JAA and EASA were founded. So a logical consequence is, if you just mathematically think through this, you cluster the expertise and you work together. You share expertise, you make sure that the people are always up to date with their knowledge and they can spend their time on meaningful things. And this is the idea that has now entered also into the conscience, or even more into the conscience of ICAO. So last year, or beginning of this year we had a big conference in Swaziland where, together with ICAO, we created, together with the existing RSOs, maybe I have a picture here. You see that RSOs, this idea is not new, and we have a lot of RSOs which are more or less successful. I think I can say that EASA is at the top of the RSOs with regards to technical expertise, also with regards to the legal system that we have in place, because it clearly forces member states to delegate some of their activities to EASA. So we are competent in some areas. We are also operationally active. We issue certificates that are valid within Europe, all across without borders. So there is hardly any other example like this. So ICAO also wants to support this approach simply because of this rational thinking. And that's why, together with us, we have started some initiatives. EASA will second very soon a dedicated person to ICAO to work on this, together with ICAO. And one of the outcomes that is currently being worked on is the so-called GASOS, this new global oversight, safety oversight system, which will enable authorities to delegate tasks between each other and things like that. So we are very much engaged in this because we think it does, we are the best one at this stage, but also we want to promote this concept worldwide. And if we have strong RSOs whom we can work, that you as the industry don't have to go to 15 authorities and get individual certificates, but get one certificate from a central RSO covering a certain region. These are really efficiency gains that we are fighting for. So just that you know, we are working on this. The Swaziland Forum that I mentioned has set some objectives. So one is the Global Aviation Safety Oversight System, and the other one is the so-called RSO Cooperative Platform, which will allow RSOs all across the world to subscribe and to exchange and to really work together, sharing, pooling of experts and all these things. So this is what I just wanted to mention. If you hear about RSOs, we are deeply involved in this. As a conclusion, and then I stop. So international cooperation is more important than ever to improve aviation safety worldwide. Besides safety, the facilitation of global market access for the aviation industry is a strategic objective for us. Efficiency, less duplication, avoidance of redundant authority work are key. And EASA actively cooperates also, as I said, with ICAO on RSOs, third country authorities, and together, of course, with industry to jointly meet the current and also future challenges. So I hope I was still halfway on time. Thank you very much for your attention. Questions?
Yeah, we got a few questions via Slido. One, for example, the working arrangement with Russia and Fatah is, I think, on progress? Or
yes. So we have the agreement with the Commission, with the European Commission, about the working arrangements. So I think it's already under discussion, if I'm not mistaken, with our Russian partners. So, and we are in discussion with them.
Okay.
Another one?
I will ask, or I will raise the question, even though we will not be able to answer today. It's about the Brexit and the consequences of it, because that is not in our hands. Yeah. It's in the hands of the politicians deciding on under which conditions this will take place. Because the question was, could for UK the same apply like for Norway, Switzerland, and Iceland? That they are.
It is one option, but it all depends on the political things that are going to happen. So we don't know. We cannot answer this. But just to inform you, what we will put on our website is some let's say, question answers which take into account certain scenarios. So you can only reply to a question whether, for instance, a BASA will be needed for the US if you take certain assumptions. And to take a concrete assumption now is probably far too risky. That's why it's not worth discussing it here.
Okay, one last question was on ETSO equipment and whether equipment from non-EU companies can be covered under the TIP. And I think the question is fairly simple. It's no, because we have in the bilateral a territorial clause that includes only the EU member states and the states from outside, and we have a few ETSO manufacturers from, let's say, China and other countries. They are not covered by the bilateral and the TIP with the US. They have to go through the authority of their home state.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Frank. And then I would hand over to Mark, who gives an update and a few more details on the latest TIP revision 6 with the FAA.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Kieft. I work for certification. I'm the Certification International Coordinator. It's fantastic to see so many of you here today, so many aviation professionals in the same room, and also to the greater aviation family outside watching on live stream. So I'm going to give a presentation today on these subjects, the EU-US TIP Revision 6, why the changes were necessary, when the changes become effective, what the changes are, of course, and what is happening in parallel to implement these changes. So, validation improvement roadmap. The FAA and EASA have agreed a 10-year plan to bring about a very aggressive reduction in validation activity. By 2022, we're aiming for a 20% level of validation compared with the beginning of the program. It's very aggressive. TIP Revision 6 is one of the first steps in this. It will bring about reciprocal acceptance of certain certificates and approvals, streamlined validation of certificates and approvals, or validation work plan for where validation is still required. TIPS Revision 6, in general, it's just been published It is not yet in force. It comes into force on the 22nd of March 2018. However, it is published. It will come into force the way it is written today. Until it comes into force, of course, TIP Revision 5 and the Amendment 5.1 still apply. These documents are still in force today. TIP Revision 7 will bring about further changes in the validation improvement. One of the big changes in TIP Revision 6 is to bring about all the validation principles in one section. In the previous revision of the TIP, they were spread out everywhere. It was very difficult to find them. Now they're all in one place. They're all in Section 3. TIP Revision 6 brings about the concepts of acceptance, streamlined validation, and technical validation of projects. All projects will be in one of these three categories. And it brings about the change from level 1 and level 2 into basic or non-basic changes. So on acceptance, acceptance is the least validation activity that each authority will be involved with. This works both ways. This works for the FAA validating our projects and for us validating US projects. For acceptance, there's no application, there's no VA approval, and there's no fee. It is basically reciprocal acceptance of each other's work. We will accept the FAA's work, they will accept our work. No fee, no application, no certificate on the end for the validating authority. It covers basic changes by the STC holder, or the TC or STC holder. When done by the TC or STC holder, basic changes, when there's no effect on the certificate, when the certificate does not have to be reissued or updated. It covers all minor changes. All minor changes now are automatically reciprocally accepted in both systems automatically. It brings about acceptance of all TSO and ETSO articles. No need to apply to the other authority. They are automatically accepted in accordance with the TIP. All non-critical PMA parts. Of course, Europe doesn't have a PMA system, but nevertheless, we accept now all the US PMA non-critical parts. And all repairs. All repairs are now reciprocally accepted. No application, no fee, no validation by the other authority. And non-critical alterations. The streamlined validation is the next step up. The streamlined validation, there is an application for validation, but there's no validation authority involvement. The validating authority is not involved technically in the validation at all. The validating authority issues a certificate. There is a reduced fee for this, and the approval period is defined up front. This covers basic changes by the STC holder or TC holder where there is an effect on the certificate. When the certificate has to be reissued, then the validating authority has to reissue the certificate. It covers most new and changed TC and STCs for reciprocating engines and propellers. Most. It's almost all, but almost all changes for engines and propellers. And it covers a larger range of basic items. The basic criteria have been expanded. There's many more changes now considered basic, and therefore will go through the streamlined validation with no technical involvement of the validating authority. And then the highest level. Still, this is the highest level, but it's been more refined than before. Now the validating authority doesn't have a free hand to ask for what he wants. So in this case, there's an application to the validating authority. There's predefined validating authority technical involvement. Predefined. The validating authority issues a certificate. There's reduced fees, and there's reducing involvement. So in this case, it'll be much clearer to all people, the applicant, the certificate holder in Europe, for instance, what level the validating authority is going to be involved. There will be an application for validation for all TCs. So all other TCs, other than ones I've already covered. For major change in STCs, when certain criteria are met, when there's safety emphasis items. Safety emphasis items will be defined up front by the authorities for each product type, and it will allow the applicant and the validating authority to clearly indicate what is needed to be done to validate this product. It will also be required for new technology, certain conditions when the certifying authority decides. Conditions are very clearly laid out in the TIP Revision 6, and I suggest you have a look at the fine detail in there. It also establishes a validation work plan for management of non-basic validations. It will be clear to all parties what the validation activity will be. So what's happening to implement this change? This change can't work by itself, sadly. There has to be other parallel activities. Bob Decision 8. There's going to be a change to the agreement between the US and Europe and the annex to the agreement, which will support the concept of lower involvement means lower fees. Lower involvement will drive lower fees. When the involvement of both parties is lowered, then the fee will be lowered. The SEI list, the list of safety emphasis items, are being created for each project category. Both parties are creating the lists and they will be published, so it's very clear to anyone looking for a change, a non-basic change, what they have to comply with. And, of course, Tip 6 brings about significant changes. There's a need for training. There's a need for everyone to understand the changes. And there's packages being developed both for authorities and for industry. This training will be available and put in place before 22nd of March next year. In conclusion, Tip 6 allows authorities to refocus the limited resource that we have on the activities and partners which pose the greatest risk. We know that we don't have the greatest risk with the United States. It allows us to focus our resources on the partners where we have a bigger risk. It reduces the resources spent by industry on validation, and it creates a more predictable approval schedule. For non-basic changes in the future, you will know what the FAA's SEIs will be on your product category. You will know that there's a validation plan approved up front. It will be, therefore, much clearer how long it will take to validate this project. Not yet in force, 22nd of March. It comes into force 22nd of March, 6 months after the signature. So while all these provisions are looking good on paper, they have not yet entered into force. Thank you. I rushed through that a little bit because I know that we're pushed for time, but I'm ready to take some questions.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from the floor? Otherwise, I would take at least one or two questions that we received by a Slido. And one is just for clarification. It's about the minor change approval by an EASA DOA. Is it automatically covered by this reciprocal acceptance by the FAA then, without any FADR involvement?
Correct. Correct. Any minor changes approved under our system also includes DOAs, are automatically accepted, therefore, under the FAA system. There is no duplicate validation or DER involvement.
Yeah. And there was one question, even though it's a bit special on TIP Revision 6, what about the applicability for Switzerland? In the past, they were used, I think, as well. EASA is involved in this. So the question was, how is this going to be applied for Swiss companies or Switzerland?
Frank, anything?
Well, the principles should be the same, but formally this is independent of EASA because they are not part of the European Union. So in principle they can do what they want. However, we strive to have the same prerequisites for all our authorities that are part of our system. So Objectively speaking, the first real coverage of a BASA of more than the pure EU member states is the trial that we have now with Transport Canada. This is the real success. So if we get there with the FAA, then we would be fully covered. But this is probably a long way to go.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark, and to you for asking the questions. And then I would hand over to Gregory to give us some update and details on the Chinese EU-China negotiations.
Thank you, Marcus. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Gregory Lievre. I'm a manager in the Certification Directorate. Until recently, I was project manager for the negotiation with China. I'm currently handing over that task to a colleague, but as part of the transition, I have the pleasure and the honor to update you on the latest developments. So if you allow me, I will start with a little anecdote, a short one. When I was a kid, I used to be engaged in travels and trips to England to learn English, into these linguistic exchanges. And before going there, our teachers would always brief us, behave, make sure you don't embarrass your English friends and so on. And in particular, you know, the English people, they don't kiss each other to say hello, they shake hands. So don't embarrass them when you arrive there, offer your hand. Now, of course, the English teachers had the same thing in mind. So they told their kids, you know, in France, we have these funny habits, they kiss each other, so don't embarrass them, don't offer your hand. And guess what happened? I mean, of course, when we used to meet, the French guys would all offer their hands, and the English ones would offer the cheek. So this anecdote illustrates how much we often underestimate the cultural dimension of relations. Now, if you transpose this nice story between kids to a very complex technical, political project between China and Europe, where the language is so different, the culture is so different, the alphabet is not even the same, it gives you an idea of the complexity of this whole exercise. However, we have progressed quite well, as alluded to by Frank. And today, I will provide, well, first of all, a bit of background information, some more details about the recent developments, a very high-level description of the content, and I conclude with one slide on the next steps. And I'll strive to do this in 10, 15 minutes maximum. So Frank already provided a little bit of background and reminded the high-level objectives for any international activity at EU level. And of course, this particular one is fully consistent with these objectives. So with bilateral aviation safety agreements, we want to achieve essentially two goals. First of all, to improve aviation safety by exchanging best practices, by challenging each other, by learning from other authorities who do things differently, but in principle with the same result. And also very important for us, by focusing our resources where we have the highest impact on safety. And very often this is not the case when we do validation exercises. So by freeing some free time from our experts to do other things than supporting validations, we think we provide a major improvement to safety. The second objective of agreements is to support our industry from both sides, so to support industry altogether, by providing predictability, by providing a single framework. We know that the industrial schemes now for design, for production, are more and more transnational, multinational. This is all within the framework of the very state-centric ICAO convention, and the BASAs are here to bridge the gap and to provide a single framework to facilitate business between two major regions. So, a few words about recent developments. I don't know if you can read this. So there were two processes in parallel. As I said in introduction, it's a bit of a complex process. So we had, starting from April 2015, the so-called technical roadmap. For those of you who were here last year, my presentation was focused on technical roadmap. So a lot of progress was achieved since then. And in February this year, in particular, we concluded so-called Track 1, which was a system-to-system assessment. And we agreed with our Chinese partners on some conclusions of Track 1. We had also this Track 2, which is a more process implementation-oriented mechanism, and this is still ongoing. So that's the first stream, which is the technical roadmap. But in parallel, there was the official negotiation. Whereas the technical roadmap implementation is managed by EASA, the official negotiation was led on the EU side by the European Commission. But as Frank mentioned, EASA played a major role in that process. So the first bullet points are referring to the official negotiation process. So this all started in March 2016, officially, when the EU Council gave the mandate to the Commission to open negotiations with China for a bilateral agreement. And there were 4 official negotiation rounds, starting in December last year, and the last one, in principle, having been held in September this year. So it was alternated in China and in Europe. And at the last one, in September, the 2 negotiating parties agreed on a text, which was slightly adjusted afterwards, but which in principle is now over. So maybe now a word of caution before I move to the next slide. When we prepared this presentation with the colleagues in EASA and in the Commission, we are facing really 2 contradicting objectives. On the one hand, we know that you know that transparency is really in the DNA of the EU institutions. It's a major objective of the Commission and EASA. As I said before, we do all this for the benefits of the citizens and industry, and we are eager to share information as much as possible. On the other hand, and here I count on your understanding, this is a very formal process, and we have a number of rules which really come from the treaties about the kind of information we are allowed to disclose during a negotiation process. And formally, this negotiation process is still ongoing. That's why we picked up a few points from the annex to give you an idea. We picked up some elements which we think are relevant for you, but the time has not yet come where we can go into a detailed presentation on what is in the annex. And the last slide will present you the next steps, and then you will see by when the detailed content can be shared with you. So with your understanding of these constraints, here are a few elements. So on the scope is design and production, and there is no limitation on the types of products. So the scope embraces all the scope of our identical products. These are some elements where there were many discussions, but this is what was agreed. And there is no temporary limitation. So the day when the BASA enters into force, it will immediately apply to all products on both sides. There were also many discussions on OSD and AEG on the Chinese side, and in the end it was agreed to have it within the scope. So many of the details for all these elements will be developed in the TIP, but as part of the overall scope, OSD and AEG are covered. There are some novelties which we randomly selected here. One of them is a reference to the possibility of concurrent certification, which is highlighted in the annex. This is a novelty from previous BASA. And we have a number of ad hoc cases which are related to some specificity and some specific differences between our system and the Chinese system. Maybe what is mostly relevant for you are the 2 next slides. So in terms of validation or acceptance of certificates, so we have developed different levels of cooperation in the annex. So we have provisions for certain certificates or certain approvals to be automatically accepted. And we also have provisions for validation mechanisms with some level of involvement principles. And we've also introduced the concept of administrative validation for certain certificates. And of course, the annex details which mechanism applies to which certificate in which direction. But that's the kind of detail which we cannot disclose at this stage. In terms of production acceptance, you know that production is one of the most important aspects of BASA. So the principle is to have mutual acceptance of the production systems and export forms with a number of conditions. And again, the details on the conditions will be disclosed in the coming month. But the starting point was really to rely on each other as much as possible. And we have worked a lot on this section of the annex, which is more developed than in other BASAs. And we tried to foresee the future, and we capture a number of production schemes which were maybe not current 10 years ago when the other BASAs were negotiated. So it's a very comprehensive section on production. We also introduced a number of provisions related to relations between authorities. So, like every BASA, we have a number of provisions on cooperation, but we also have strong language allowing each authority to maintain the confidence it has in the other one through recurrent mutual assessments. So now a few words about the next steps. So it's a bit complex. The last negotiation round concluded that both negotiating parties agreed on a text at the level of the chief negotiators. Now, this has to be formalized at a higher level. So in the weeks to come, some senior officials of the Commission and of CAC will initial the text. So they will commit on both sides to freeze the content of the document. They will commit to stop the negotiation. Once this step has been accomplished, then on the EU side, there is a mechanism to allow the signature. So then the text, as it will be transmitted by the Commission to the Council, and the Council will authorize its signature by the President of the Council in principle. Now, a few months are needed for that, and after that, there is yet another stage, which is the ratification. So the text, which will have been formally signed, will go to the Parliament on both sides, and in Europe, so the Parliament will give its consent, and then there will be another Council decision which will formalize the ratification. And this will lead to a diplomatic note being sent to China, and the Chinese side will do the same. And when the second diplomatic note has been received, then the entry into force starts after a few weeks, which are foreseen in the agreement. So it's a long journey still. I think there is a strong willingness on both sides to accomplish all these procedures as quickly as possible. But as you will appreciate, since it involves the Council, the EU Parliament, this is a mechanism which is not under the full control of the European Commission, and that's why we cannot provide some deadlines at this stage. The very last step in this whole process will be the approval of the TIP. So after the entry into force, there will be a committee, similar to the COB with the US, which will formally adopt the TIP, and that's when the first effective effects of the BASA will start. So, Xie, thanks for your attention, and I'm ready to take questions if you have any. Thanks.
Thanks, Gregory. Are there any questions directly from the floor? Yes, over there.
Hello, Fred Steenberger, Aviation. I tried to get in through Slido, but my question is not transmitted. I have started 2 validations in February this year. I've been informed yesterday that due to the fact that this BASA is not signed, any validation is stopped for the time being. If this validation is not completed till February next year, I have an aircraft on ground. Is there an alternative workaround, like with the working instructions or working arrangements that have been in place before?
Yes, in principle, yes, but we are always dependent on the willingness of CAAC, and objectively speaking, they also have limited capacity, and we know that they cannot do everything at the same time, especially now that they are developing big products themselves. But this is an alternative. There is an agreement in principle that we continue with the current ways of working until the BASA is in place. So there should be no obstacle. The agreement is business as usual. If you are facing a particular problem yourself, then you can turn to myself or to my colleague. I think there was already a question who follows Gregory. It will be one of my colleagues who will follow up the file, and then we try to support you.
Okay, I will forward my
If I may,
to you.
It depends whether you have already a working arrangement or not.
Yeah.
But this can be detailed.
No working arrangements is in place, so
that makes it a bit more difficult, because the Chinese really limit any investments into something new. If there was already a working arrangement, it's a relatively simple amendment process. But for this one, still, my offer is there. Send me the information and we try to follow up.
There were a few questions for clarification, because on the slides it seems that you talked mainly about products. whether this covers also parts and appliances.
Yes, it does. Thanks for the question. So in part 21, when we say products, it's anything which has a TC. But in the BASA, we have a different definition of products, and this includes parts and appliances.
We have one more question from the floor.
Matt Golling, Dunlop Aircraft Tyres. We've had an application in since September last year, and we got told everything was stopped and was no workaround. We've got 195 aircraft waiting for an STC.
Okay, I think it's...
So the same message, we try our best to support this. There is this kind of agreement that we have made. We have even minuted this, but if it's not happening in one or the other case, please contact me. I'll try to follow up.
Okay, Gregory, thanks a lot for the presentation. We actually managed to recover 5 minutes. Very good. The next... Oh, there was one more question.
Yes, please. One more question relating to the Tip 6 coming FAA BASA. I understood that the TSO and ETSO are equally being treated, both ways acceptable. So my question is this the same statement concerning the TSO and the EASA, which are considered with the figure 2 in front of the letter, which is a distinguishment between, there's a difference between the TSO to the FAA, originally initiated by the JA, as far as I believe?
The answer is simple. All ETSO standards and all TSO standards, regardless whether it's a 2C, a 2C 500, doesn't matter. All of them.
But technically they are different then?
So be it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then the next topic, also related to the international environment, is instructions for continued airworthiness and FAA validations, which caused a lot of issues in the past. And thanks to Paul Hatton, Senior PCM in General Aviation, to give us an update on this particular topic.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I wasn't expecting to be stood in front of so many people, so... No, you didn't tell me. If you had, I wouldn't have come. Yeah. Okay. As I was introduced, I'm a PCM in General Aviation Department, and something we run into a lot is the problems we have with the FAA validations of ICAs coming from our DOA organisations. So going through this fairly quickly, see if we can recover another 5 minutes for you. In the validations, the approved maintenance manual acceptance is handled by the FAA through a standard issue paper, which is usually called M01. The ACO, which this is a little bit out of date because the ACO has now disappeared because the FAA have reorganised. I don't know what the new terminologies are, but the ACO has the responsibility for accepting the ICA in accordance with the FAA order. The FAA used the Aircraft Evaluation Group, the AEG, which is part of their operations department, to assist the ACO by recommending the acceptance of the ICA following a review of the documents. And more often than not, the problems are encountered at the AEG level, leading to extensive revisions of the ICAs or the AMMs. So there's a little note. This presentation, I sent it to the FAA because they were supposed to be giving it, so they've put a few little notes in. So there's a note at the bottom there. The FAA Standards Staff Branch, which I think is the new terminology, is responsible for ICAs for incoming type certifications. So that's just a clarification from them. Okay, you've got to first of all realise that there are some differences, and I won't read through all this, I'll let you read it, but basically the FAA Part 65 on licensing and our Part 66 differ, and I think the relevant bits are kind of underlined there to give you a little bit of a feel. And I guess some of you are probably from the maintenance background, you'll realise that there are these differences, that the A&P mechanics in the FAA can do practically anything, and they don't need any further training, especially for general aviation types. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the difference is, again, under 21A61, the ICA are allowed to be incomplete at the time of type certification, as well as the time of entry into service. Products with incomplete ICA will have to have a limitation that the design approval holder must make the missing portions available before any of the products reach that stated interval. Under the FAA 21.50, the ICA must be in place at entry into service. That's a difference. Okay. I'm struggling a little bit here because my eyesight isn't quite good enough for the screen here. Okay, the requirements are CS for small aircraft, CS 23-15-29, and the Appendix G there too. And for the FAA, similar requirements. At first glance, it appears they appear to be identical, and there is no declared significant standard difference between these two. But the FAA see a difference there in that the FAA requires the ICAs to be accepted by the administrator, and the ICA they say they have identified them as an SSD. We don't really consider them an SSD, and that's something that's still got to be discussed a little bit. And so they're generally FAA retained, and that's where the problem starts. So if you think about it, virtually every modification you do has an ICA. So that means that every modification you do is going to go through the AEG, and they're going to look at the ICA. And this is where we start getting into problems. Okay, the FAA are required to accept the ICAs, and they are required to approve the airworthiness limitations. And also that there is specific language in their Appendix G. For instance, the airworthiness limitations has to have a statement that says these airworthiness limitations are FAA approved. Well, how do you as a European DOA put that in your ICA? You have no delegated authority from the FAA. So that causes problems. So there's non-harmonisation of the maintenance and operational requirements, FAR 65 and CS 66, and non-harmonisation in the 2150 and 21A 61. So that's kind of the background to the whole problem. Okay, the FAA have a couple of policies that they apply. There's an FAA order 811054, which tells the ACO and the AEG staff, or whatever they're called today, how to go about accepting and approving the ICA. And then underneath that they have a policy statement as well, which further gives them guidance on what they need to do. One of the things that you might like to look at is in that FAA order there is actually a nice little checklist which you can go through, and it gives you a good way of making sure that you've covered all the points that the FAA want to see in the ICA. So that's somewhere to go for a bit of information. Okay, so these are some of the examples that typically come up time and time again, and we get the ICAs thrown back at us time and time again. Reference to a document issue with or later approved. You can't do that because under the FAA system, the ICA that is relevant is the ICA that's delivered at the time that the aircraft or the product is delivered, not later approved revisions. The only way a later approved revision becomes mandatory for an operator is if the FAA AD it. So the ICA that's delivered 40 years ago with your aeroplane is still the ICA you use unless there's any ADs to the contrary. Wording like it's recommended to, because it's neither you should or you shouldn't. Life limits based on operational conditions. We've seen this a few times where it says if you land on a grass runway you have one life limit, if you land on a tarmac runway you have another life limit. Nobody bothers recording them. The maintenance staff don't know whether it's been landed on grass or tarmac. It doesn't work, so they don't want to see anything based on operational conditions. Inspections with no detailed procedures. where you just say, inspect the item. Yeah, but what are you looking for? Inspect it in accordance with what? Looking for what, etc. Okay, and then the other one, another one is putting maintenance recommendations in the airworthiness limitations. Airworthiness limitations are airworthiness limitations. A good example of one we saw where they put a maintenance recommendation in was somebody said it's recommended that you exchange the spark plugs at 1,000 hours, and that went in the ALS. Okay, recommended means what? Change the spark plugs. What does that mean? Does it mean put in an old set or a new set? You know, it's not an airworthiness limitation, it's a recommended maintenance practice. Okay, in general, other things that they don't like to see as required, because then nobody understands what as required means. It means different things to everybody. Check for play. What does that mean? How much play is allowed? Check for excessive wear. Again, what's excessive wear? Your idea might be different from mine. Check for correct installation. Sorry, what does that mean? Maintenance on the aeroplane must be conducted by an approved maintenance organisation. Well, in the FAA system, anybody that has a licence can do the maintenance. You don't have to be under an organisation. So again, that doesn't work for them. And things like contact the design approval holder for further instructions. That means the ICA is incomplete. So they don't like that either. Okay, carrying on, unacceptable practices. ALS that do not have related inspection procedures identified. So if you say inspect something, you've got to point them at the inspection. Now that could be in another part of the maintenance instructions, so you can refer to the TC holder's maintenance manual, paragraphs, whatever. But just you've got to identify where you want them to go and what you want them to look at. ALSs that require inspection procedures that are referenced in other sections of the AM and not clearly identified. Again, that's a similar sort of thing. If you're going to refer to other documents, it must be clearly indicated. And you can't put at latest approved revision, because again, the FAA don't accept that. It's got to be at the revision that's pertinent for the product that you're talking about. Okay. Things that require the owner-operator to only install design approval holders, products and replacement parts. Again, that's a restrictive practice. They won't accept that. Requiring that alterations or repairs are only done by somebody authorised by the design approval holder. Again, restrictive practice. They won't accept that. Establishing or attempting to establish any restriction on the owner-operator to disclose the ICA to the person that's doing the maintenance. So effectively, the owner and operator can give that information to the person that's maintaining the aircraft. You can't insist that they have to come to you and buy it. That's not allowed. Incomplete ICA for a product is not acceptable to the FAA, so any to be decideds or IOUs are not acceptable. It's got to be complete. Clear procedures and practices and references, etc. Okay. Some of the areas that you may like to look are these ones, which will give you a little bit of an insight into what the FAA are looking for. I think that's about it. So yeah, as you can see, they have quite a different approach to what we have, and it does cause a lot of problems. Questions? I'll put my glasses back on, then I can see that far.
Thanks.
Yeah? Baffled and confused.
Just one particular question for your presentation. Is the FAA validation mindset for STC, ICA applied to ETSO manuals?
As far as I know, yes, the answer to that is yes, it's the same mindset.
We had a few more questions related to the FAA tip. Which was it one? Yeah, an EASA basic STC need to be validated by FAA to be valid in US, or is accepted in US without validation activities, just for clarification, Mark?
Basic STCs can fall into the two categories, sadly. Basic could be the fully accepted, or it could be the streamlined validation, depending on the conditions of the basic TC or STC. Again, the TIP provides exact guidance on which ones will be falling into the accepted and which ones fall into the streamlined validation. It depends on the detail in the change or the STC or the TC.
Okay, and one last question. This automatic acceptance of minor changes, how will this information be transported to the maintenance organization? How would they know that something is automatically accepted?
Because the maintenance organization follows the TIP and the MAG. The maintenance organization complies with the regulations in place. The TIP and the MAG both apply. The maintenance organization therefore know that any design minor change approved by the FAA is automatically approved under the EASA system and therefore is approved data and they can install it.
We have one question from the floor.
So I'm not quite sure what happens, sorry, Carl Thomas, Hybrid Air Vehicles. I'm not quite sure what happens if you've got a basic STC, whichever category it comes into, which has got ICA.
Yeah. Good question. I think the answer to that is we don't know at the moment. Because these SCI lists have got to be established, and if they put 231529 instructions for continuing evidence, if they put that on the list as an SCI, then it's all going to get very interesting. So that discussion has still got to be had. Yeah.
Okay, with that, I think we should hand over to the last presentation on the agenda for today. And thanks, Paul, for keeping up another 5 minutes. And I would like to welcome Dominique Roland, head of the GA and ARPAS department. And he will talk a little bit about the GA roadmap and the Part 21 proportionality. Thank you, Dominique.
Thank you, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. Last presentation of this long day. I see you are all tired, so I will try to be quick and giving you this update on the GA roadmap project and present a specific topic, which is a task that we call Part 21 proportionality. So it's totally relevant to this session. So concerning the roadmap, a quick reminder about the motivation and what was the problem we had and we still have to address. It was basically a diminution, a reduction of the activity of the general aviation in Europe. And our stakeholders, the community, GA community, mentioned that it was partially due to disproportionate regulation, a kind of syndrome of one size fits all, and that we had designed our regulatory framework we had in mind to mainly address commercial aviation and altogether impose to general aviation regulation which were not proportionate to the risk level. So we acknowledge that it was necessary to adopt a specific new approach for GA in order to ensure a sustainable development in Europe. So it's founded on an agreed risk hierarchy, agreed strategic principle based on cooperation. Cooperation, you will hear this word many times in the presentation, cooperation with all stakeholders, and a commitment at all levels. And this foundation gives us the highest chance for success. So active application of risk hierarchy, it's clear that when we talk about protection of citizens traveling with commercial operators, commercial air transport, people are looking for more protection. But when you are talking with people flying sport aircraft for recreational aviation, what do they want? They want more freedom.
So we have here different objectives and different class of risk. So we established a risk hierarchy. 6 principles that were defined at the beginning of the project in 2012. One size does not fit all, and we have applied this principle in many of the tasks that you will see later on. Try to establish a philosophy of minimum necessary rules, regulate only when it is absolutely necessary. We have other tools that we can use, we'll see later on, like safety promotion, very effective. Adopt a risk-based approach in our way of thinking. It's not always easy because it's very often it's a cultural change. Try to protect grandfather rights. If something was working well before, well, try to keep it and not change it. No? Apply this smart regulation principle proposed by the EU, and make the best use of available resources expertise, meaning that, well, if for drafting glider regulation you are looking for people, maybe better to look to the community, to the federation, to the European Gliding Union, and this is what they do today. They are working and drafting new regulation, and there is only one EASA staff on board the task, and all the others are stakeholders, because they know better than we know what regulation they need. So cooperation for this project, it's really important that we have on board the European Commission. Of course, we have the EASA, but we have all member states on board, and we have the GA users. Industry is not the right word. We should replace it by community. We don't have a real GA industry in the sense of what you could know for the commercial air transport with big players like Airbus Helicopter, Leonardo. Here it's a little bit different. And the success is when all partners are working together, and this is what we could achieve, and this is why we could obtain the result we have obtained so far. So we are organized with a steering committee. The steering committee of this project is made of EASA directors. Patrick Key is the chairperson, and we have a task force where we have an individual representing the different stakeholder or group that you see below. So stakeholders, we have an EASA, we have a GA advisory committee that we call GA-Com with 19 people coming from the community, and 2 of them, the chair and the vice chair, are part of this task force. The same for this NA group that we call today the GA-TEB, the TEB. All NAs are represented, and 2 of them are represented in the task force, and then we have the commission, representative of the commission, and representative of EASA. It's a small group of 8 people trying to lead the project. The EASA project team is made of EASA staff located in different departments and directorates. Could work for Ops, FCL, ATM, airspace, initial airworthiness, continued airworthiness. We have established a network of GA-minded people working together to try to help to progress the task of the project. This NA tab, where we have all 28 EU countries, plus the 4 associated countries, so 32 representatives, and the stakeholder group that we call GA-Com, 19 people so far. And we meet together on a regular basis. Simpler, lighter, better regulation to stimulate general aviation. So, as said before, regulate only when needed. Hand responsibilities back to people, organizations that are able to take that responsibility, and avoid this automatic use of a cat logic to GA. So, this first slide, we use 2 slides very similar. This is the status of a very important task that we launched, and many of them are completed. Not all of them. Changes to the basic regulation. You know that it's an important project, and GA is impacted a lot by the changes proposed by this new basic regulation. This will happen in 2018, progressing well now. Part-time light is an achievement. The opinion has been published in May 2016. It's a big change for the condition to maintain a small airplane. Facilitate access to I4. It's a holistic approach across different domains. But the first one we decided to address with the licensing, FCL, and we created a new basic instrument rating. So that's a very important proposal where we for the first time propose a modular approach, competency-based training. We are also changing the way people have to acquire and demonstrate that they have the proper technical, theoretical knowledge. So the approach is totally new. So far, in order to get an IR rating, you had to go through 7 certificates of the 14 of the ATPL. So the IR was a step on the ATPL route. Now we want to propose something which is specific to the need of a private pilot who wants to fly IFR in single-engine piston with specific risk associated to this kind of operation. So totally new approach. It's a success as well. And the NPA was published in 2016, November 2016. The CS TAN is also a very significant change, very successful. We are now at Amendment 2. We can, and we plan to amend CS TAN on a nearly yearly or 18 months basis. Thanks to the CS TAN, we have reduced the number of applications for minor changes in GA by 30%. So it means that now people can use the CS TAN and avoid to apply for the approval of changes. And we continue to expand the scope of the CS TAN. More options for pilot training outside ATO, that we call DTO, Declared Training Organization. You want to start a new flying club with a group of friends and you want to hire or on a volunteer basis use a flight instructor. You create a small structure. You can start operating and start to do training just by declaring your activity without having to wait for the approval of your National Aviation Authority. So it's a totally new concept and the first time that we make use of the, at that level of the concept of declaration of capability, and then you start working, and the oversight will come after. Air operation and license balloon rule book, so that's mainly for the balloon community. It's a rule book where the balloonists will have access to the requirement applicable to their activity. Before, they had to look into 2,000 pages of the OPS regulation to find what was applicable to the balloon. Now they have 15 pages and they know what they have to do. We believe it's safer, it's easier for them, and they're quite happy with the approach. We did the same with FCL. And now, because they were so happy, the gliding community came and said, we want to do the same. So we accepted to expand the approach to gliders, and we actually working on OPS and license rule book for the gliding community. We have a medical certificate which is lower than the Class 2 medical certificate that we call the LAPL medical certificate. It's not yet well implemented by the member states, so it needs safety promotion, but the tool is there. It's in our regulation. I will talk later on about Part 21 proportionality, and finally, one of the big achievements of these last years was the reorganization of the CS23 using industry standard and a totally new approach where we have reduced the requirement in the CS23 for more than 350 to 60. And we moved to an objective-based regulation where we have removed all the prescriptive element of the certification specification to move them into IMCs. And it's a totally new approach, and this was done in coordination, very good cooperation with the FAA. They are doing the same. We are nearly harmonized, not fully, but this will open a lot of possibilities, like having common certification basis for our project, and to go maybe for mutual acceptance of our TC for GA product design in accordance with CS23. So it's a big step forward also in terms of international cooperation. So we are delivering in accordance with our commitments. We did a lot in the context of this project. We continue to work. Unfortunately, the second slide is showing that many of the work in progress and delivered by the EASA, the different working group, the stakeholders, are still stuck at the level of the legislative process, which is a very heavy legislative process. The opinion have to go through consultation at the level of the Commission. We have to deal with the legal services, and they don't like what we do because they want legal certainty. And when we talk about objective-based regulation, legal certainty is not easy to achieve. So we have difficulties in convincing our partners that this is the way to go. Then we have to go to the EASA committees. Unfortunately, we don't have enough to address the many opinions that we would like to publish. So we have a bottleneck there. So we are slowing down when it comes to passing the vote to the committee with the EASA committee, going to the parliament, and finally entering into force. So, but we are still working and try to lobby and convince our colleague that we need to complete the task. So I don't go into the detail of where we are, but we have some places where we have red light, and we are working hard to resolve the issues. This is the first part, so a quick overview of this GA roadmap, just to show that we are very, very active. And when I say we, it's with you. I mean, maybe not the people here in this room, but the stakeholders. And this project is a success because we have an impressive contribution, a very positive contribution of the community and also the NAS. And this is what I like with this project, that we are really working together, and this is why this is working well. Now moving to the last topic, a very interesting project that we call Part 21 proportionality. It's a little bit similar to what we have done with Part M. We had Part M, we have Part M Light. We are dreaming about a kind of Part 21 Light for GA. So when we talk about GA, well, general aviation, there is nothing general in general aviation, because between a balloon, a glider, an airship, and a Gulfstream, which is also general aviation in term of operation, you can see that the scope is very broad, and the problem and the risk we have to address are very different. So here we talk about the low end. We talk about the low end and aircraft below 2.7 or maybe we'll see 5 tons. So we want to introduce flexibility, simplification in Part 21 certification for small organizations designing simple products. So as mentioned, small CS-23, LSA, glider manufacturers, but no commuter, for example. Practically combine different approval, DOA, POA, MOA for these small companies. We are dreaming about a solution where we could have a kind of small manufacturer approval. You are designing and building a glider, you have a small shop with 20 people. Okay, where is the difference? We have the design, production, everything is a little bit mixed up. There is one guy who is also the boss of the production, who is the boss of the design office. And then today they have to be audited by a POA team, national authority, audited by an MOA team, national authority but different team from a different place, and for the DOA if they want one, by EASA. Come on, it's extremely complex and they do not understand. So of course we want to have a possibility to adjust this because all companies are different. What we know is that the current system, rules, culture are suitable for large organizations and large aircraft. But it was not really intended to really work well with very small organizations and very simple product. We have some difficulties also to address in the context of responsibilities, because EASA and NA have different responsibilities. So NAs are competent authority for production, for maintenance, and we are the competent authority for design. If we want to go into the direction of a combined approval, this is creating difficulty. But at least we can already start with combined oversight. A shift in the culture, processes, and cooperation between all stakeholders. For sure, we started to work, we are working with NAs, and we see through the discussion that the reaction is showing that they have difficulties to change their mindset. So we have created a task force which is working on the issue, and the project is divided in 2 phases, phase 1, phase 2, and you will see that phase 1 is made of 2 parts as well. So first of all, and this is nearly done, development of new documents, draft IMC that show how the current Part 21 can be made workable for smaller companies. So these IMCs have been prepared, they are ready, we have consulted already, and just with IMC we can really change the life of the small companies. The next phase will be to test this new approach in pilot project, and we expect this could happen in 2018, in first quarter. And for the phase 2, to propose a new Part 21 Light consisting of objective rules supported by flexibility in the MC. And for this, we have to wait the new basic regulation, and this one will generate much bigger challenges at different level. So the task force members, we have NAS, LBA, DGSE France, FOCA. We have manufacturers representing sailplane, other GM manufacturers, and then we have the association represented by Europe Sport, who are on board and helping to draft the new regulation. So in our term of reference, we have some keywords like flexibility and simplification, proportionate to the risk, performance-based, pragmatic implementation, redistribute responsibilities, good words. And with this term of reference, we pursue 3 initiatives. So first of all, to develop the alternative to Part 21 MCGM for smaller company, for POA, DOA, and test this new MC in the pilot case. And then step 2, develop the new approach. So of course, as mentioned before, this is linked to the entry into force of the new basic regulation. So what we call this MC for European light aircraft, the step 1, we organized already a focus consultation workshop with stakeholders to save time and collect directly feedback on the draft of MC. And then after the workshop and after this consultation, later on with the STEB and the GA sectoral team that we call now GACOM, we are currently revising the draft further to the comment received, like we would do after a CRD, and we will go for a direct publication for an ED decision. So it's an EASA decision. So this one is an easy one. We don't have to go through the heavy legislative process through the Commission and the Parliament. So this workshop was organized in June 2017. We decided as a first step to limit the scope of the first set of AMC to Part 21, so design and production, and leave the maintenance apart. Use the possibility offered by the current rules, so the Part 21, and we have used this workshop as a public consultation instead of an NPA. So we have today 3 main problems area. So the existing AMCs were really written for large aircraft and large companies, especially for POA. This is where with the feedback we received from the stakeholders, most of the complaints were related to the production approval system. They were complaining that we had a non-natural split between approval for DOA and POA. For them, in their small organization, they had the impression to be more integrated when they talk about production and design, which is not always the case in very large and complex organizations. And so why they were in favor to work with consolidated teams. And the procedure, Section B of Part 21, which is the authority requirements, are really process-oriented, when for them they believe we should go more into the direction of a product or of a side. So how to improve the situation? Ensure common sense for small companies. So for every specific means why it is requested, ensure that general means required are really necessary to meet the requirement, and define the means so that it serves the intent. So you will see this led to a reconstruction of the AMC system. So that's I mentioned before, the change toward product-oriented surveillance instead of today's process. Utilization of other influence to company instead of duplicating aspect, and a change toward integrated assessment instead of individual certificate. Well, we will see that we might have to go in the first step into a kind of mixed approach where we have an integrated assessment and individual certificate because of the competent authority mentioned before. So, but we will find solution for that. And a change toward partnership and trust instead of hierarchy and suspicion. So to try to rely to people on the condition that, of course, proper monitoring, proper oversight is in place to confirm that we can trust, rely on this organization. So we give some example there to explain what could happen. apply product-oriented surveillance instead of process-oriented, significantly tailor the extent of documentation of the quality system, make use of practice method in many areas, especially for production. Demonstration of repeatable procedure by evidence of work result could be enough, and the competent authority oversight will focus on work result instead of process overhead verification. People could, and I agree with it, understand that we are stepping back a little bit of an approach which was developed along the last years, where we were really moving into the process and organization approval direction, where suddenly we move back a little bit to the product level. But we found that it's probably necessary for this very small organization and this kind of product, which are fairly easy to verify at the level of the product, where it's not the case when you do it at the level of an A350, for example. And so the system of AMC ELA, we will have a set of AMC which will be applicable only to a certain level of product, level 1 and 2 in the new CS23 system. And we plan to provide AMC or guidance for all requirements, meaning that the company can work with the guidance and the AMC only. Today we have a lot of gaps in the system. There are many requirements which are not covered or not totally covered by AMC or guidance. Here we will have an exhaustive coverage of all requirements with AMCs and guidance. And by applying the AMC, which are written in a very practical way, the organization will have the certainty to comply with the regulation. We put a prescriptive element in the AMC in the GM to give them some certainty. They don't feel comfortable generally when we listen to them. They don't want to have the responsibility to interpret a Part 21 requirement. They want clear instruction. What should I do? So here we see more or less some example. We are providing together with the set of AMC in the GM templates for different documents that the company can use. We believe that it is necessary for new or very small companies. They need to start with something. So we are proposing already templates. They have been prepared in the context of the task. I don't go into the detail. So maybe I will repeat something I said before. The AMC explained what is needed for small company. The template handbook reflects the pragmatic bare minimum to meet the requirements. The competent authority explained the spirit of oversight, not due for some, and provides a standard and amended checklist. Pilot projects are intended for verification of the AMC and approach, and this AMC ELA will have a short life since changes will occur from the implementation of the new basic regulation. Yes, we don't know when exactly, but we can expect that if we succeed, within 2 years, we will propose probably a new Part 21 light that will probably make these changes obsolete. But at least we can work during a few years with the new system. This step 2 is of course more ambitious, and we have more uncertainty concerning the outcome. We are still waiting for the final text of the basic regulation to know exactly what we can do and in the direction we should take. But certainly something will happen, and we will have a specific Part 21 for the very low end and simple GA product and small organization. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any question, happy to try to give an answer.
Thank you, Dominique. Any direct questions from the floor? Okay, we received very few questions. There's one? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was looking to the distance and I didn't see you in the first row.
Dominique, you said that Part 21 Subpart G and Golf as well are impacted, at least in the first instance. But what about the other Part 21 subparts dealing with design approval activities, so linked to the DOA or linked to certification activities or other activities?
This is implicit. So okay. When we say Subpart J, then we enter into the game of references to other parts, and they are included.
Thank you.
Yeah, we got one question. Can only the AMC ELA be used and not the complete set? I'm not quite sure what is meant with complete set, but maybe you understand the question.
Well, it could happen. I try to understand the question, but it is mentioned somewhere in the presentation that, of course, we will have to face individual cases. Or the companies we are working with, they are all different. They could be small, but still different. The product could be simple, but different. And the need of the company could be different as well. So for sure, there are cases where it could happen that a company decide to say, okay, this SAMC proposed in the new set of SAMC is nice, but I believe in my case I would like to use this other one. It's an AMC. It's an acceptable mean of compliance. The regulation is still Part 21. What is important is that you show that you comply with Part 21. So we will have flexibility provision to address the issue on the case-by-case basis. And this is the intent. We want flexibility.
Then we have one other question, which is not really related to the GA roadmap, but to your domain of business. What is done to protect GA, a non-controlled zone, against drone flights?
Well, we should organize a specific workshop to talk about the drone, maybe. Okay, so you know that we are working on a new set of regulation for drone. I don't know if all of you are really aware of. It's a very big, important activity. It's a complex issue. So when we talk about drone, we talk about what? We can talk about a toy, 200 grams. We can talk about a male drone, military usage, several tons, flying 20,000 feet, still a drone. We can talk about a drone used by Amazon to make delivery of goods. So it's a very broad topic. Anyhow, when I'm flying with my small airplane, I don't want to have a mid-air collision with a drone, big or small. At least the big, I have a chance to see them. The problem with the drone is it's a little bit like when I try to avoid a mosquito to keep my wing clean. It's very difficult. And even if I would have a system alerting me on board, a kind of alarm, you have a drone in the vicinity, then I start to watch outside. Where is it? I cannot see it, I will never see it, and I will have the collision with the drone. So, of course, we need to ensure proper separation of this kind of activity. I don't say really traffic, because talking about drone, it's more an activity. With the GA traffic, especially my colleague working for rotorcraft are really concerned, because the rotorcraft can fly very low. They can fly in urban environment, and they are a little bit afraid about the multiplication of this activity, the development of this activity. So we are working on it. We have created a system where we have different categories of drone. We have what we call the open category, where you find the drone, the toys, and also quite big drone, up to 25 kilo. So the open category is quite open already, but there are different classes in it. Then we have the specific category, where now the complex to operate the drone becomes a bit more. The process to operate the drone becomes a bit more complex and subject to some authorization and safety assessment. And then we have the certified category. So 3 big different categories. For the higher end, certified category of drone, their integration in the airspace, we have discussion going on. We know how to manage them. They could have transponder on board. They can be managed by the ATC. I believe it's not business as usual, but we know how to do it. For the specific category, we will have a system called SORA, where people will have to perform risk assessment for the kind of specific operation. This is controlled. This is operated by commercial operator. I don't have big concern with this category. I believe for the moment, we worry, and the community is worrying a lot about the open category and the toys, mainly because children operating toys, they don't have an aviation culture. So they don't know what is a CTR, they don't know what is even an airport, aviation regulation, they don't know what is 500 feet. So if we put a limitation at 500 feet and you ask your 12 years old son, oh, don't go above 500 feet, what does it mean? So the lack of culture for me is really one of the big issues. So we need to protect ourselves from that. And there are some, of course, a lot of discussion and a lot of initiatives taken, like a no drone zone. And so some member states already publish map showing many places where it's forbidden. It's clearly forbidden to operate a drone, especially in the vicinity of an airport. So this is an approach. And there is discussion, we have discussion and system develop, like geofencing, for example, to ensure that the drone, by design, cannot go beyond certain limit when they are operated by people who are not capable themselves to identify the limit. So all that is currently under development discussion. We are working hard on it. We have a lot of people working on that, and not only EASA, it's also ICAO, it's FAA, it's different standardization bodies. Hundreds of people are working actually on the drone problem. On our side, we have launched a research activity concerning mid-air collision with drone, and we will do now testing to see the effect of mid-air collision between, for example, a drone of different weight category, different shape, and with engine, with rotor, tail rotor for rotorcraft, GA airplane. So we will try to conduct this study in order to really identify and measure the risk and take a measure that will allow to mitigate this risk. So we are very active on this topic. It's a very interesting problem, but complex to resolve. But we will manage.
Okay, thanks very much, Dominique, for this very exhaustive answer on drones. And I see you're really passionate about it, which is really good. We have one last thing that we were requested to explain a little bit, which is not on the agenda, to give an update on changes to EASA and certification structure in particular. And as I see Trevor is back with us, it's a perfect timing to hand over to him to explain these changes to you.
Is it on? Yes, but Marcus, you know the direction delegation goes, not upwards. Okay. I think it's a good idea, a good opportunity just to tell you a couple of the changes we made in the certification directorate in the year. Actually, we made them at the beginning of the year, so they've already taken effect, and I think they're working quite well so far. Of course, we need to build and learn how best to work. This morning I mentioned, and I think today, no doubt, we have reinforced that there are a lot of changes and we need to adapt to those. So to a great extent, the changes in our structure were aimed for us to be more responsive to the changes coming. So what you see now is the agency organisation structure, and oh, you don't. What I see is the agency organisation structure. Now you see it. And we didn't change that, but you see in the certification directorates we have 7 departments, and these are the same as they were before. We didn't change the actual departments. Just to remind you, we have large aeroplanes, we have general aviation, rotorcraft, propulsion, the environment, design organisations, and the policy area. I've shortened the description of each one. So, and what I wanted to do was set up a way to ensure we have consistency across those departments for the different products, but proportionality as well. So we needed a kind of a matrix organisation to check that we're not only being consistent, but learning the best practice from each of those and benefiting across the different departments. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, I have to do it myself, do I? I don't expect you to be able to read the small print there. But you'll see this is a breakdown of each department, as I just mentioned, and it gives you the sections in each. But what I want to draw your attention, at the top, there are 2 deputy positions. Alain is here. He is the deputy for the technical certification aspects of the directorate, and Julian Hall is deputy for the business side of the directorate. And so between them, they assist to implement the technical and business changes that we put in place. So Julian Hall, in terms of the business, uses the department's CT7, which is on the policy and procedure side and the safety information side. And we have Gregory and Mark here. They are heading up 2 of the sections there. And the other one, Michael Gerhard was here this morning. He's not here now. He's heading up the rulemaking section as well. So through that, we have the mechanism to put in place the procedures, the process, the business plans, everything to implement changes. And on the other hand, I don't expect you to read that either, but this is what Alain has to deal with. Effectively, on the left side, you'll see a chief expert for each of the technical disciplines with senior experts. Now, this was already in place before the beginning of this year, and it's working reasonably well. They cut across all the business lines. What we added on the right-hand side are the chief PCMs, and they are for certification, validation, and continued airworthiness. And the idea there is to help us to implement the LOI, the validation roadmap, and also to make sure that we have consistency across the different business lines for continued airworthiness of different products. Alain, you're here. Do you want to add anything on that?
Thank you, Trevor. Maybe one word. You had a very good example this morning with the work, the presentation, made by Ralph Bader together with Michael Gerhardt. Ralph is a chief PCM in Airworthiness, and he has worked with CT7, so with namely Julian's team, on developing the LOI material. And thanks to the network of senior experts and senior PCMs, we make sure that whatever we discuss in the various working groups is properly communicated and implemented across all product lines. So you had a real-time example this morning. Ralph is not working for a dedicated product line. He's working together with us for the complete directorate and for all business lines. Up to him to organize his work with regulatory bodies to ensure that we have a standardized approach for LOI, the change management, the training, etc., the negotiation with the DOI department and so forth. That was the best example to illustrate what we expect from our structure here in terms of efficiency gain, making sure that we speak with one voice in the directorate.
So this morning there was a question about how we're going to change, it was either the culture or behaviour or something inside EASA. And this is part of the answer to that. We're really using these chief and seniors to lead the way with the teams to implement the changes and change the culture and behaviour. It's part of the change management in CT, in the Certification Directorate. So there's a quick high-level view of what we changed. If you have any specific questions on that, happy to take them. Otherwise, I'm the only thing standing between you and our reception. Okay. Well, thank you. I hope you found that interesting, just to give you an awareness of what we're doing. Seems today was very productive from what I gather. Sorry I wasn't here the whole time. I did tune in on YouTube, actually, while I wasn't here, and it seemed very good. So thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you for taking part. You've lived up to my expectations to really make it a good debate, and we'll carry on tomorrow. Marcus, do you want to close for today?
Yeah, nothing much to add, Trevor. Thanks a lot. I would like to thank everybody for the contributions, the presenters, the organizers who did a hell of a job to set up this conference in the first place. Andrea and her team and Francesca here dealing with all the agenda setup and chasing people for their presentations. And I think, as most things are for you important, is the networking as well. We have now, with the reception, I think, ample time to network and exchange views with a drink or water or some snacks. So, and tomorrow morning, it's quite important. We start at 8:30 with the first presentation, so a bit earlier than today. It's hard, I know. Unfortunately, it's my presentation, so you better be here. Thank you.